Welcome to our discussion on the idea that Western governments, despite their democratic labels, are more accurately described as oligarchies dominated by economic elites.
That perspective is really striking, especially when you consider the claims about the USA and European nations being essentially run by the rich.
Yeah, it's like you have these models of democracy on display, but then when you dig into the data, you see evidence that money, big corporations, and a tiny elite group hold disproportionate power, and the research just keeps piling up.
Right, scientific studies have even indicated that the USA functions as an oligarchy.
Exactly. And one point that really hits home, it's like they say money buys 80 to 90% of the seats in Congress.
Yeah.
That's not something you see in a typical pure democracy.
And then there's the famous Citizens United ruling, which opened the floodgates for corporate money in politics.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the decision became a cornerstone for how these wealthy interests funnel funds into every campaign.
Right?
And that, in turn, shapes policies more in their favor than in the interest of everyday people.
That relationship between money and power is really quite disturbing. But don't you think calling these governments outright oligarchies might be a bit too black and white?
I see your point, but the evidence is compelling. When you look at examples like how elite fundraising is integral to the campaigns of figures like Joe Biden and even past administrations, it really underscores that the system is skewed.
True. And it's interesting how even someone like Donald Trump is portrayed not as an outlier, but as a symbol. A perfect example of how oligarchic influences manifest.
Exactly. Trump is often used as a case in point, even though he isn't the only one. He represents that larger pattern where billionaires not only thrive, but practically steer the political
Yes.
ship. It's a snapshot of the entire system.
And this narrative doesn't stop at the US. It spans across Europe and other Western nations too, right?
Right, it's definitely transatlantic. You see the same dynamics at play in Europe, where political leaders often have deep ties to large corporations and financial institutions.
Yeah,
It creates a consistency that forces us to question the democratic label.
it almost feels like a modern-day robber baron saga. Only now, it's happening on a global scale.
Exactly. And then you have these economic details, like how billionaires pay lower tax rates than, well, most ordinary citizens. It turns the idea of fairness on its head.
That's a stark disparity, and it really challenges the notion of equality under a democratic system.
Absolutely. And then the influence of super PACs and other fundraising mechanisms comes in, making it almost inevitable that these moneyed interests dominate.
Right?
The whole system seems engineered to maintain that status quo.
And we see that through various sectors, whether it's political campaigns, public debates on healthcare, or even the co-opting of digital innovations like crypto by big financiers.
Right. It's like the rich have their fingerprints everywhere. From healthcare policies to the new tech landscape, the pattern is clear. The system is heavily tilted. Even what we think of as mundane debates end up serving the interests of the elite.
Which leads back to the big picture. Even though these governments label themselves as democracies, the underlying mechanics really revel in oligarchic control.
Exactly. This whole dynamic is like a carefully curated illusion. On paper, everything screams democracy, yet the distribution of power tells a different story. And that
Yes.
contradiction is at the heart of the critique.
It makes you wonder how much of the facade is maintained by strategic narratives, huh?
Definitely. While these governments use democracy as a banner, they also demonize more overtly authoritarian regimes. It's as if they ignore their own oligarchic tendencies, conveniently sidestepping their inherent contradictions.
There's a certain irony there, though, don't you think? Criticizing autocracy while practicing a form of elite rule.
Absolutely, it's a classic double standard. And beyond the rhetoric, when you think about it, every aspect, from campaign finance to political endorsements, hints at a system built for the rich. It's an engine
Yep.
that drives inequality.
And what about the public's role in all this? The narrative touches on how even public sentiment, like opinions on healthcare, is manipulated under these pressures.
Yeah, it's not just economic, the cultural impact is huge. The way policies are shaped often ignores what would genuinely benefit the majority. It makes you question if the public really has a voice at all.
It seems then that the label of democracy is, in many ways, a convenient cover for a deeply entrenched oligarchy.
Exactly. And then you see figures like Mitt Romney or even Rishi Sunak, who are seen as representatives of Wall Street interests in their respective countries. They further illustrate that oligarchic influence isn't restricted to one nation or one political party.
That's such a crucial point. The system's inherent design benefits the rich, regardless of the political landscape.
Totally. And it also nudges us to think about how these dynamics are self-perpetuating. The more money dominates politics, the less room there is for genuine grassroots democratic change. It's a cycle that's hard to break.
But do you see any realistic path out of this? It almost seems like the status quo is too entrenched.
It is challenging, no doubt about that. However, some pathways, like robust campaign finance reform and stricter lobbying regulations, could potentially level the playing field. But rolling these out means fighting against deeply embedded interests.
And that's where a lot of people argue that reform efforts are, well, too diluted by those same interests.
True, and while reform is certainly on the table, the battle against economic influence is like trying to overturn a mountain that's been built over decades.
Right?
It's not an easy fix.
It really underlines the importance of public awareness, too. If more people understood the extent of oligarchic control, maybe we'd see greater demand for change.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step. The more we dig into these discussions, whether it's about the role of Citizens United, super PACs, or the funding of political leaders, the clearer it becomes that the current state of affairs isn't a true democracy. It's a call for deeper, systemic change.
And that's the takeaway. The idea that beneath the veneer of democratic values, the actual power dynamics favor the wealthy.
Right? It's almost like the system is designed in a way that perpetuates itself through a loop of elite financial influence.
Yep.
Even when leaders promise reforms, the underlying structure rarely changes in a meaningful way.
And that really challenges our expectations of governance. So, what do you think can be done to break out of this cycle?
Well, moving forward, there needs to be a serious reevaluation of how political funding is handled. Initiatives that increase transparency and ensure broader, more equitable participation in the political process are key. The idea is to shift from a system where money dominates to one where every citizen has a meaningful voice.
It's a long road ahead, but acknowledging the problem is the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. It all comes down to demanding accountability. Whether it's through grassroots movements or policy reform, the goal is to dismantle the entrenched power structures that favor the rich.
Yeah.
That's the only way to realign governance with the democratic values we aspire to.
It's a compelling challenge, questioning not only our political systems, but also the very definitions of democracy.
Right. And it makes you wonder, can Western societies ever truly pivot away from this oligarchic model? Or is it a permanent, albeit hidden facet of our governance? The debate is wide open, and it forces us all to re-examine our assumptions.
Well, it certainly leaves us with a lot to think about. Thanks for this deep dive into the dynamics of power and money in politics.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas. Remember, even if a system is labeled as democratic, it's crucial we look behind the labels and ask tough questions about true representation and power. Stay engaged, and until next time, keep questioning everything.